Hi everyone, welcome to my channel Bibbidi Bobbidi Books. My name is Ellie and this is going to be my March reading wrap up. So in March I read a grand total of 8 books, which is quite good for me, although to be fair 2 of them were manga and there were also quite a few short stories, which is why I managed to read about twice as much as I normally do, but still I'm taking it as a win. And yeah, I've got quite a mix of books to talk you through today, so I hope that you enjoy this wrap up. If you want to jump ahead and hear my thoughts on any book in particular, I'll have the timestamps down below for you, so feel free to do so. And yeah, without further ado, I'm just going to hop straight in with the first book. So the first book that I read in March was actually a middle grade story called The Girl of Ink and Stars, written by Kiran Millwood Hargrave. So this is a story about a girl who is the daughter of a map maker, a cartographer, and she lives on this island which is being ruled by this politically corrupt governor, and he has basically placed some rules upon her people and has limited their movement on the island. So he's basically restricted them to a certain area and says that no one can cross through the forest to get to the other parts of the island. And then one day our main character's best friend goes missing, and Isabella is forced to use her skills that she's learnt from her father to try and track down her friend. And of course her quest takes her through this forbidden forest and to the other parts of the island, and she uncovers some secrets about the island's past, and it interweaves some myths and legends into the story as well. So it has a really cool premise, and I know that a lot of people really love this one, so I had really high hopes for it, but unfortunately there was just something that didn't quite work for me about the writing in this story. It felt to me as though everything was very rushed, and it almost read as if some of the descriptions were half finished, so I found it really hard to visualize the world because it's such a cool idea and such a cool concept, but I just found it really hard to picture anything because I felt like there wasn't much given to us as a reader. There wasn't much for me to go on, and I also just felt like the pacing was so fast. So we were jumping from one plot point to the next. Our characters would be in one location and then within a page they'd be somewhere else, and so I just felt like I never had enough time to properly appreciate the story or to digest what was happening or to unpick any of the themes that our author was presenting us in the story. And I also didn't feel like I connected with the characters because they all felt a little bit flat. Again, I don't know if that's because there wasn't that much time dedicated to building them out and to establishing connections between the characters. And there were quite a few moments where I know I should have been moved, but I just didn't feel anything. And I think that's just because I didn't really connect to the character or the story, which is such a shame because it sounded like it would be something that would be right up my street. But yeah, I think it's just a writing thing, it just didn't gel with me, but do take my opinion with a pinch of salt because I'm obviously not the target audience for this story, and I don't know whether younger readers might prefer this writing style, I don't know, and a lot of people love this one as well. So yeah, let me know your thoughts if you've read this one. Did you love it? Are you surprised by my thoughts? Let me know in the comments down below. Next up we have a story called Sweet Bean Paste, and this was written by Durian Sukegawa and it was translated by Alison Watts from Japanese to English. And this is a contemporary story, so it's quite different to what I normally pick up, and it follows our main character who's a man called Sentaro, I think. Yeah, I've got my notes over here if I'm glancing that way. But yeah, we follow a man called Sentaro and he works in a confectionery shop, and his shop sells these sweet treats called dorayaki, which are basically pancakes filled with sweet bean paste. And we find out quite quickly that he's not very happy with his life. He's got a difficult past that he's trying to come to terms with. He hasn't really established what he wants from life, and he's kind of just working for ends meet. He doesn't really get much enjoyment from what he does, and he also struggles with his own mental health issues and depression. And then one day everything changes when he meets this elderly woman who has disfigured hands, and she approaches him and she basically convinces him to hire her to work work in his confectionery shop, and she does this by giving him some sweet bean paste that she's made, and he tastes it and it's the most delicious sweet bean paste he's ever tried. So he of course ends up hiring her, and we basically just follow the two of them as they get to know each other, as they strike up this unlikely friendship and this really respectful relationship basically together. And we find out a lot more about both of the characters' pasts, and we find out why the elderly woman has disfigured hands and some of the things that she went through. And it's a really beautiful story. It definitely talks about the healing power of friendship, but it also has some heartbreaking moments. It does deal with some heavy topics, so do check out the content warnings. But all in all, I thought it was a really lovely story, and it looked into some really interesting themes about finding your sense of purpose in life, and you know, getting all of your enjoyment out of the things that you do, and about relationships and community, and also about prejudices. And there's quite a lot to unpack with this little story. So yeah, I really enjoyed this one. I would recommend picking it up in spring as well, because the confectionery shop actually has this beautiful cherry tree that grows outside the window, and so there's lots of lovely descriptions of the cherry blossom and the petals blowing in through the windows and everything. So it's quite atmospheric for springtime. So if you think this sounds interesting, maybe now would be a good time to pick it up. Okay, next up we have a couple of manga. So we have volumes 2 and 3 of The Girl from the Other Side. So this is a really sweet manga series that I've been enjoying, and it's set in a fantasy world which is split into two halves. So you have the inside, which is where the humans live in peace and harmony, and then you have the outside, which is basically this kind of cursed land where these monsters live, and if you touch one of these monsters, then you become cursed yourself and you turn into this monstrous form. And we basically follow the story of a young child who somehow ends up on the outside. So it's a human child that ends up on the wrong side, I suppose, and she ends up befriending one of these monsters, and we follow the two of them as they form this friendship, I suppose, and as this monster kind of protects her and takes her under his wing. And yeah, it's a really, really sweet story. I love that trope of someone who's typically viewed as like a monster as actually being kind and caring. And yeah, it's a really lovely story. I will say though that I have the paperback versions of this manga, and the print quality isn't very good in them, so it's hard to see some of the images because they're very dark. So if you are interested in reading this one, I would recommend going for the deluxe edition, or I don't know if you can read it online, but yeah, definitely be wary of picking up the paperback because the images aren't great. And of course, when you're reading manga, half of the enjoyment is from the artwork. You know, it's as important, if not more important, than the words in the story. So yeah, that was a bit of a shame, but yeah, hopefully I'll get my hands on a deluxe copy of this manga series, and I'm looking forward to continuing on. Next up we have Bunny by Mona Awad. So I finally read this book. I feel like this book has been really popular on BookTube for so long, and I'm a little bit late to the party, but I finally read this one. This is a very strange book that blends dark humour and satire with fairy tale horror. And in this story we follow our main character Samantha, who is a student at Warren University, and she's studying creative language or creative writing. And there's this clique of girls called the Bunnies that are also on her course, and they're very strange because they are just very over the top. They're always really immaculately dressed, they all talk the same, they all are very cuddly and affectionate towards each other, and even more weirdly, they all refer to each other as Bunny. And it's all a little bit weird. And then one day our main character of Samantha gets an invitation from the Bunnies to go to one of their workshops. So she decides to go out of curiosity, I guess, because she's kind of weirdly fascinated by these bunnies and wonders what it would be like to be like one of these girls. I guess it's kind of like Mean Girls vibes, you know, like the popular crowd. I guess she wants like a little taste of what it would be like to be in their clique. So she goes along to this workshop, and the story gets more and more surreal and more weird the further that you progress through this story, and it becomes really quite dark, but it's one of those stories that I just couldn't put down. I was confused 90% of the time in this story, and I think that's in part because our narrator of Samantha isn't necessarily a reliable narrator, and you're never 100% sure how much of the story is in her head, what she's imagining, what's actually happening, because she has a very flowery imagination as well, so her voice is very strong in this story and she describes things in a really creative way, because I guess that's kind of the way that her mind works, but it means that I'm never 100% sure what is actually happening and what she's just elaborating on, and for that reason I found it really interesting. And yeah, this little book tackles a lot of really fascinating themes as well. I feel like one of the main ones is classism within education, because Samantha comes from a low income background, and we see how that really affects her university experience and how that compares to the bunnies, who are all really wealthy and well off and live in these really beautiful houses. And there's also quite a lot of conversations about the constraints of university if you're studying something like creative writing, where, you know, you're trying to produce this creative media, this writing that's different and personal to you, but at the same time you kind of have these expectations on you about what your tutor might like, what your students like, and you want to fit in, but at the same time, you know, you want to produce something that's meaningful to you. So that was quite an interesting topic as well. And there's lots of talk about loneliness and our drive to want to fit in and be like other people and to connect to others. And yeah, I just feel like this is one of those stories where you'll probably take away something different every time that you read it, or each person who reads this might consider something different from the story. It's one of those just weird ones. It's quite open. If you don't like an open ending, then you might not necessarily like this one. But yeah, it was very weird, but I enjoyed it. So yeah, that was Bunny by Mona Awad. Oh, I'll link my vlog down below, by the way, of me reading Bunny, because I feel like I go into a little bit more in depth about my thoughts on this one, so if you're interested I will have that linked, so do go over and check that one out. Next up, I read another middle grade story. So this is The Girl Who Drank the Moon by Kelly Barnhill. This is a fantasy middle grade story that I've seen everywhere online and finally picked up, and this is a story about a witch who lives in a forest, and the village that's near this forest thinks that she is evil, and they think that they have to give up a sacrifice every year to keep her at bay. So they basically abandon a baby in the forest as a sacrifice to the witch every year, and we follow the main character, Luna, who is one of these babies that's left in the woods, and we find out that the witch isn't actually evil, and she's just very confused about why the villagers keep leaving these babies in the forest where they could come to harm, and she spends her life protecting these children, and she shepherds them through the forest, feeding them on starlight to nurture them on their journey, and she delivers them into the welcoming arms of families on the other side of the forest, so they have a very happy and content life with their new families. But the thing with Luna is that the witch accidentally feeds her moonlight instead of starlight on their journey through the forest, and that gives Luna immense magical powers. Now, it's very dangerous for a human to have magical powers, especially a young child who doesn't know how to control her magic. So the witch decides to adopt her basically and to raise her as her own, and she calls herself Luna's grandmother, and the story kind of progresses from there. There's very much a theme of family in here, particularly on motherhood and different types of mother figures. And yeah, it's also very whimsical, it's very creative. I liked some of the side characters in here as well. They were definitely really fun. There was a bog monster who's a really big fan of poetry, who was just so sweet. And we also have a little sidekick animal companion, I suppose, in the form of a teeny tiny dragon. And what's funny about this character is that even though he's tiny, he thinks that he's a really big dragon, which is just quite funny. So yeah, there were lots of elements that I liked about this book, but I think it was a little bit overhyped for me, because I really thought I was going to fall in love with this one and it was going to be a new favourite, and I just quite liked it. And I was surprised to see that there were a few things that I didn't like so much that I haven't really heard people talking about. I think my main complaint with this story really is that we were told rather than shown things a lot of the time, which is a big gripe of mine. I like to be shown things rather than just be told them. The main thing that we were kind of told, not shown, was the relationship between Luna and her grandmother. It was very much, oh, they have this amazing relationship, they have this really close bond, but we never really saw that. In fact, what we did see was the fact that Luna and her grandmother lied to each other a lot, and that was something that was focused on quite a lot in this story but was never resolved in any way, which I thought was really strange. There was no kind of moral from that, there was no resolution, which I thought was a little bit weird. But yeah, so I've got mixed opinions about this one. I thought it was, you know, a fun read, nice and quick, had lots of nice whimsical moments in there, but it wasn't an all-time favourite. I will also link my reading vlog down below if you want to hear more of my thoughts on this one, because I go into a little bit more detail in that. So do check that out if you want to hear more. Okay, so next up we have Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. So this is this author's debut novel, which I'm really surprised by because it was so well crafted and such a beautiful story. But yeah, I will definitely be picking up anything else this author writes because I absolutely love this story. I think it's quite a niche story, so it's not going to be for everybody. And it's one of those books where it's hard to categorize it because it kind of blends genres. I'd probably describe this as a slow horror story but reads like a literary fiction. And yeah, I just thought this was such a beautiful and unique story. So in this book we follow a character called Leah, who is a marine biologist, and she goes on this deep sea mission and something goes wrong, and the deep sea mission was supposed to last for 3 weeks, and for some reason it ends up being 6 months that Leah is underwater on this submarine. And we basically see how that experience and that trauma affects her as a person, and how it also affects her relationship with her wife, who is a woman called Mira. And what I enjoyed about this story is that we have 2 perspectives and 2 timelines. So we've got a perspective from Leah, which is basically following what happened when she went on this mission under the sea. And then we follow the perspective of her wife Mira in the future, and we see how she's changed from what happened to her, and we watch their relationship. And it's very much a story about the 2 of them. And what I loved about this is that the characters just feel so real. They're really raw, and they have this love that feels so realistic. It honestly feels like a real relationship that I'm reading about, because it's not glamorized in any way. It feels very real, very raw. I really loved our characters. They felt so realistic. They, you know, it talked about their oddities and their flaws and the weird quirks that they do, and they just felt like real people. And I also felt like I connected quite a lot with the character of Mira, because she has quite a lot of health anxiety, which is something that I struggle with myself. So yeah, it was quite interesting reading a character that has those thoughts and feelings. And the focus is very much on grief in this story, and it's kind of about how you're not given the luxury of grieving someone who's already there. So you might, for example, notice that someone that you love changes and you're grieving the person that they used to be, but you kind of have to do that in secret because the person's still there. And, you know, you're not given that luxury of being able to grieve for that person that you miss. And I felt like this had quite a lot of parallels with the idea of having to care for someone who has a terminal illness, and it was just so beautifully done. It's such a heartwarming and also really, really heartbreaking story, and yeah, I just thought it was beautiful. And the writing is 100% the star of the show. It's such immersive writing, and I just felt captivated right from the beginning, even though it's a very slow paced novel. But I don't think this is going to be for everybody, because there's quite long paragraphs and it has quite a distinctive writing style, and yeah, because it's that blend of genres and because it's quite a subtle and slow story, I don't think it's going to be for everybody. But I personally just thought this was incredible and I really, really enjoyed it. Okay, and the final book that I read in March was a science fiction called Emergency Skin, written by N.K. Jemisin. So this is a sci-fi novella, and it's a really unique way to tell a story because the author is basically talking to you as if you are the main character in the story. So I just thought that was really interesting and just a unique way to experience a story. So I really liked that. And we basically follow you as the main character who are going on a mission to Earth, and you've been sent there by this colony called the Founders, and it turns out that they are ex-inhabitants of Earth. So they fled Earth many years before, when it was apparent that the planet was dying and was no longer habitable for people. So they fled and they created this new colony, and it's this colony of people who they think have adapted to be like the perfect version of humans, as it were. And yeah, it's not clear why they are sending this main character back to their home planet, so I'll keep that a secret. And it's also a very short book as well, so I don't want to give too much away. It's quite hard to give a synopsis without saying too much, but what I really enjoyed about this sci-fi novel was the humour in it, because it is actually quite funny. And it's funny because we see some of the thoughts of the founders and how their ideas might differ slightly from ours, so it's quite comical. But it also does deal with some interesting topics, including individualism, morality, the choices that we make. And although some of the themes and the messages were quite on the nose, I did still really enjoy this one and would highly recommend it to you if you're looking for a short science fiction. So yeah, I really enjoyed that one. And then the only other books that I wanted to mention are the ones that I'm partway through. So I am partway through Kings of the Wild by Nicholas Eames. I'm up to page 281, so I'm about just over halfway through this one. So this is a fantasy book about a band of mercenaries who get back together for one last hurrah. And if you want to hear my thoughts on this one, then do keep an eye out for my wrap up next month. And then the other one that I started but haven't finished is Royal Assassin by Robin Hobb. So this is the second book in the Farseer trilogy, and I'm up to page 354, so again just over the halfway mark of this one as well. So if you want to hear my thoughts on this one, keep an eye out for that next video. But mild spoilers, I am enjoying both of them. But yeah, that brings me to the end of this video, so I hope that you enjoyed it. Please do leave me a comment down below, because I'd love to have a chat with you. Let me know what your favourite book was from this month, or if you're not sure what to write, you could always just leave me an emoji, maybe just leave me like a heart emoji or something in the comment section, because that way I know that you're here and I can say hi. Don't forget to like this video if you liked it, and subscribe if you want to see more from me, because it really helps out my channel. And yeah, I guess I'll see you next time with another video. Bye!